Make sure you put a mark on your calendar to go next Friday or Saturday to the Homeschool Expo in East Ridge at Camp Jordan. It's Friday, 9 o'clock to 6 p.m. and Saturday next week at 9 to 4 on Saturday. 70 exhibitors, educational books, software, ideas, people, contacts, counsel, aid, and schools will be there also recruiting students in the future. This is David Tulis. I do thank you for giving me just a couple minutes of your time. There is a quote in the slave narratives of a wicked master, and the man says, "My master was mean and cruel. I hates him. I hates him. We was treated no better than one of his hound dogs. His family was as scared of him as we was. They lived all their lives under his whip. No sir, no sir. There warn't no meaner man. He done everything he could except eat us. We was worked to death." Now, there were some masters in the South that had a report like that among their slaves. These people being quoted in the slave narratives, a federal government history project during the Depression, give negative reviews, but most of them give a very positive review. How is that? That freed black people think longingly of the relation they had with their people, right? Their white folk in the big house. That was how they viewed their masters. And the slave narratives are a remarkable history project that give lie to the standard issue NAACP opinion about those days. And that's why I think if we take advantage of the NAACP's efforts to overthrow the monument of General A.P. Stewart, we will learn something about those days, and we will see in right perspective where we are today, because we are in a kind of servitude and a kind of slavery. But before I can get to that, I wanted to say that it is Book Friday, and we want to have a word about a book that you need to read and that you, my listeners, should be assigning to your children. You have children, you should have a copy of this book. It's a 75-page volume and very easy reading. It's called The Law by Frederic Bastiat, a Frenchman. He was an aristocrat and was a libertarian. You could style him as a classical liberal, because in those days, even those days, the liberals were the people who wanted liberty, right? They were of liberal mind, as I am. This is David Tulis, and I must say that though we have Sean Hannity and we have Alex Jones said to be on the right, they're not really on the right, but they're said to be. Okay, they're said to be. Well, I'm the one and I'm not on the left, but I'm the one who is a classical liberal. So I like to be able to say when I meet people that our station has remarkable diversity. The classical liberal David Tulis here every morning at 9, and the Love Your Neighbor by local Nooga-centrist guru. And then in the afternoon and in the evening, we have people on the right, the nationalists and the conspiracy diggers up, such as Alex Jones, who sometimes presses his case a bit too far, but who nonetheless is very well informed on everything from sky striping to the deep state and the Trilateralist Commission and the CFR. Good information there, but perhaps overrating the effect of those elites and the overstating the claims of those elites upon the real world as God made it, right? As God governs it. Bastiat was a Roman Catholic, and he was also, as I'm surprised to find out from his page at Wikipedia, he was a Freemason. Freemasons tend not to be liberty-oriented people, and we know, we've read in the paper this week about the new temple that the Freemasons are building in Chattanooga. As their civic organization struggles for membership and seems to be losing, since the Freemason argument has largely won the day. Culturally, what else is there to do? They're not really keeping up with the times, and they're not seeing how their whole machinery of alternate reality is being undermined by the marketplace, by homeschooling, by the diversified and the free market sharing economy. Bastiat in the law gives a very, very good defense of the marketplace. And here's a quick passage that gives you a tip, a clue as to how to identify legal plunder. Okay, what we have with commercial government today that has enslaved the black man probably as badly as the white man is called commercial government. But how is this legal plunder to be identified? Quite simply, he says, see if the law takes from some persons what belongs to them and gives it to other persons to whom it does not belong. See if the law benefits one citizen at the expense of another by doing what the citizen cannot himself do without committing a crime. Then, he says, abolish this law without delay, for it is not only an evil itself, but it is also a fertile source for further evils because it invites reprisals. If such a law, which may be an isolated case, is not abolished immediately, it will spread, multiply, and develop into a system. The person who profits from this law will complain bitterly, defending his acquired rights, right? That's in italics. He will claim that the state is obligated to protect and encourage his particular industry, that this procedure enriches the state because the protected industry is thus able to spend more and pay higher wages to the poor working man. He said, don't listen to this sophistry by vested interest. The acceptance of these arguments will build legal plunder into the whole system. And of course, that's what we have today. Bastiat making the classical liberal argument that David Tulis makes in our day. In fact, he says, this has already occurred. The present day delusion is an attempt to enrich everyone at the expense of everyone else, to make plunder universal under the pretense of organizing it. And he says there are many names to it. And the organization of plunder would include tariffs, such as the moral tariff that sparked the War for Southern Independence, protection, benefits, subsidies, encouragements, progressive taxation, public schools, guaranteed jobs. How about? Guaranteed profits. How about? Minimum wages, a right to relief, a right to the tools of labor, free credit, and so on and so on. All these plans as a whole, with their common aim of legal plunder, constitute socialism. So that's my recommended book for the week. It's The Law by Frederic Bastiat, and just look it up. It's B-A-S-T-I-A-T, B-A-S-T-I-A-T, Bastiat, Frederic Bastiat, a Frenchman. And I've not read him in the French, though I'm sure it's as gracious as the translation is in the English. And legal plunder is what we find when it's organized by the state. It's far more comprehensive, far more vicious, and impossible to overturn. You can overturn legal plunder by a private party. If there is an enslavement that's private, it can be overturned. And the problem does not grow and then come to involve the entire economy, right? If it's a local and private slavery. When slavery and socialism are brought into the public realm, then the plunder is organized by all, and everybody has a stake in it. That's why we are facing national disaster in the United States, because the plunder is going to be breaking the system down. Absolutely. It will be an absolute breakdown. And who will suffer the most? Well, the black man will suffer the most, especially if he is disconnected from community, if he does not have family support, if he does not have church support, if he does not have his own sense of prosperity and identity with his own little business, with his own little shop or a service that he in his gift from God could organize if he just had a little encouragement. But the encouragement is not going to come from organs of the state. You know, we don't live in a country of families and individuals anymore. We have, on one side, we have a sort of hyper-individualism, postmodernism, which says every man has his own truth and every man should live hedonistically, pursuing his own narrative. In a way, that's the idea of pursuing your own narrative is good, and that's what the free market is about. And I would say that's what Christianity is about. The gospel seeks to prosper every individual by having that individual, you see, look out for the prosperity of others. And that's how we have a marketplace where you think of other people first because God told you to, right? That's how you love God, is by putting your neighbor first and yourself last and overlooking the slight, right? That's part of the grace narrative in Christianity. And people who are oppressed today are those who don't get that kind of support. They don't get that encouragement that that Christianity gives, and the state at every turn keeps them back from it, keeps them from service, the service, you might say mindset, right? The service orientation that the gospel requires. Now, turning to this question about the Southland, the NAACP, I think, is very good to bring up this question about the general, and I think we should probably thank the local chapter for it. But the South, slavery in the South was better than, I would say it's better than what we have today in many ways. Even though there was a legal claim by a white man upon a black man, that legal claim generally was operated with lenity and a grace. Contrary to popular belief, slave owners generally relied on motivational incentives to get work done rather than the whip to increase efficiency. Some typical incentives were cash payments, there was time off, there were team bonuses, and there were ample opportunities to earn extra money. Of course, that was real money in those days, real silver, by selling produce from their own gardens or their own plots of land. And in the work assignment system in the Old South, very inefficient economically, but it allowed a lot of latitude for people who were enslaved, right? Legally enslaved, they were. But they could finish their tasks ahead of schedule and use the time that they had aside to rest, to visit, or work on their own projects. Some were allowed to work off the plantation to earn additional money. And slavery was doomed as an economic system, and many anti-slave people, such as General A.P. Stewart, knew that. They said this system doesn't work; it's not efficient. And though Stewart was a practicing Christian, apparently in much of his life, he apparently had some break with the gospel because he disbelieved in hell, according to Ron Littlefield, our former mayor. He understood that slavery had a problem because the gospel encourages every man to be free if he's able, right? That is a gospel obligation. If you're enslaved, find your freedom. Most people today, white and black, reject that advice, and I've taken that to heart now, that I don't try to get people to seek freedom. I used to think that was important, but I don't make that effort today unless there are exceptional individuals. But slaves had higher wages than people in other parts of the world. If you were a slave in America under a Christian master, you were better off than a working man in a grungy town in Great Britain or in the fields of the farmland in France. Ex-slaves had negative comments about their masters, but generally they were very favorable. There was a woman named Clara Young, 95, of Monroe County, Mississippi, and she says, "What I think about slavery? Well, little miss, I tell you, I wish it was back. Us was a lot better off in them days than we is now. If them Yankees had left us alone, we'd have been a lot happier. We would have been on relief, an old age pension for the last 3 years." And there's a study that pointed out of 331 references to the treatment of slaves revealed that 86% of former slaves described their masters as, quote, good or, quote, kind. Decidedly negative comments were less than 5%. Here's a quote from a man named John Cameron, 95, of Jackson, Mississippi. He says, "My old master was the best man in the world. I just wish I could tell and make it plain just how good him and old Mistus was. The overseers was made to understand and be considerate of us. Mars had 2 of the slaves just to be fiddlers. They played for us and kept things perked up. How us could swing and step out by that old fiddle music always a-going on. Then old master come around with his kindly smile and jovial spirits. When things went wrong, he always knowed a way. He knowed how to comfort you in trouble." Yes, there were some who were negative, but why was there such grace between the races? Well, there was the Christian religion that enlivened the dealings of white people to those black people whom they had purchased at auction. Okay, they bought them for $500. These were investments in labor, investments in future capital. But just think for a second: how many black people today have student debt? Student debt is the exact same kind of servitude, and in fact, you can't get rid of it. If you were a black man, you could buy your own liberty if you saved up your dollars. Again, these are real dollars, silver. If you saved enough dollars, you could buy yourself. You could manumit yourself. A black man today who has student debt, he may have $60,000 in student debt to get a degree in law, let's say, or to get some kind of degree maybe in psychology or history, maybe philosophy. He cannot get rid of it. He can't manumit himself. He cannot buy himself back. Well, he can, but he has to pay the debt. He's going to have to pay the debt. And his Social Security retirement inflow, if he starts at 62 or starts at 65, that will be garnished if he hasn't paid his student loan debt. That kind of debt is impersonal. That kind of debt is permanent. Whereas in the Old South, it was personal and not perpetual. And many people in the South were freed blacks. In Delaware, according to Ira Berlin and his book, Slave Without Masters, 9 out of 10 black people were free. How did that happen? Well, that was because Americans let black people buy themselves. And in the slave system in North and South, there was the means, since it was not efficient economically, there was means for people who had been motivated to work hard by the Christian religion to work hard for the master in the morning and work privately in the afternoon and in the evening and run businesses. It happened all across the South. And so that's why 85% of black people who were now freed and interviewed in the 1930s by this public works project that gave jobs to journalists like me, that's why 85% of them were very favorable about their people, right? A black man and a black woman, they owned the master. The master was his person, right? That family was their family. There was possessory claims on both sides. It's like in marriage. You know, marriage, you have a property right in your wife. You, my listener's wife, has a property right in you. It's a property right. In fact, it's legally enforceable as a property right in your body and in your wealth. You have a property right in her body. You have a property right in her worth, right? It's a legally enforceable claim. And so, and if you, my listener, are an employer, guess what? You have a property right in the employment of that person who is in your office or in your factory for 8 hours a day. And that's called the master-servant relationship. Even now, even today, it's a master-servant relationship. Look at the way the IRS enforces the distinction between contractors and employees. That distinction follows the slave model exactly. We have slavery as part of the human condition, right? We have it because of the fall of Adam and Eve. And slavery, like slavery to sin, slavery to men is part of the human condition. But the promise of the gospel is very, very exciting because it promises that over time there'll be less human slavery and more slavery to God, more obedience to God and less obedience to human masters required. Right? In a marketplace, there is not obedience, there is service, right? It's service voluntarily given for the reward of the payment. And the marketplace has always the solution for slavery. Now, we have one party in this scheme, in this narrative, that does not accept the idea of liberty, and that's the modern welfare state, the modern surveillance, warfare, and welfare state. It does not recognize freedom. It does not recognize liberty. And with the rise of national government, we have what the former vice president of the Confederate Republic warned about in his book. His name was, what's his name? I've got the book here in my hand, and Alexander Stevens. He has a great conclusion of his book. It's a rather dry and brief summation of what happened. But he says that we've lost, since the war, the things represented by the South, which would be local government, local control, and what's called states' rights. These have faded. Rome, he says, the most renowned of ancient republics, it is said, fell at last by the weight of empire. This, under her system, was inevitable. She was a single republic. In her growth, she did not recognize the federative principle, which was the one fought for by the South in large part. In extending her jurisdiction over neighboring states, by not adopting this principle and securing the sovereign right of local self-government to all peoples, he says, thus falling within her limits, but by assuming absolute dominion over them, she necessarily became a centralized empire with ultimate despotism as a necessary consequence. Look at the police state abuse of black people today. Police this year have killed 680 people. When I looked this morning, I think the number was 680 people. Killed them, assassinated them, executed them. Think of Javerio Eagle, the black man gunned down by city police last year. an absolutely unnecessary execution of a citizen who had done nothing worthy of death, right? Nothing worthy of death. The police could not figure out how to talk to him. It was not possible to talk. The only barking done was not by orders. There was plenty of that, but the muzzle flashes of those pistols. The United States, on the contrary, are founded. Notice, the United States are founded on the directly opposite principle. They do not constitute a single republic, but a federal republic. And he goes on to say, now therefore, that the chief cause which led to the late war between them is forever removed, if they shall adhere to the principle of the sovereign right of self-government on the part of the states respectively, which lies at the foundation of the whole fabric, then there is no perceived reason why they should not go on till there is still a higher career, and so on. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader, Nooga